Welcome to Starter TV. I'm Jennifer Crumpton, and today I'm in the studio with Michelle Lederman. She's the author of Nail the Interview, Land the Job, as well as many other books, and she's the CEO of Executive Essentials. Michelle, tell us a little bit about your career journey.
Well, it's a little convoluted. I'm actually a recovering CPA. And the funny thing is, I say that, and I met somebody once who's like, I have that on my business card. I was like, I thought I invented that. I actually spent the first decade of my career in finance. So I did everything from audit to mergers and acquisition to hedge fund investing. I was the only woman on a trading floor.
Oh my goodness.
It was an interesting place. I was the only woman on a global venture capital team. So I really was heavy finance until I got to the Pinnacle, which was a corner office overlooking the New York Stock Exchange, which was, loved my office. And then I realized I didn't want to be there. And so my transition began as I was on the trading floor, and I realized what I was meant to do. And it happened through a relationship with my boss at the time. He was the treasurer of the bank, and he was promoted to be the CEO of the Tokyo branch. So I went out there with him, hired a coach to go out and help us teach the traders and the bankers how to report to a New York-based CEO. I did everything she did and then some. And I was paid like maybe 10% of what we paid her. So at the end of the week, I said to the CEO, at 6 o'clock in the morning, a little hungover, not having gone to sleep yet, I could do that. With complete and utter confidence that I could do that. And he said, okay. And that's how my transition began. And I still did my hedge fund investing, and I still did the budgets for 8 departments on the floor. And at the same time, every time he wanted something trained, he would send me to learn it, design a program, and deliver it in New York and Tokyo. And that was the beginning of my transition.
Tell me what it was like to be the only woman on a trading floor.
Yeah.
What was that like? What did you have to sort of do to succeed?
It was interesting. You know, you really do get a thick skin. And I'm actually going to take you back even further to when I was the only woman on the global venture capital team. And this was in the late 90s. And this was at a time where I actually asked the company, I said, am I allowed to wear pants? And they said, well, there's no written rule, but I just wouldn't. We were at this conference. It was the entire global team. There's 2 women in the room. The other one was the secretary. They sat me next to her. And one of the, men comes up and he goes, I'd like some coffee. And I looked at him, to me, and I looked at him and I said, I don't drink coffee, but thank you for offering.
And what was the response you got?
I didn't wait to look at his response. I continued to do what I was doing.
Smart.
And the next day, I moved my little nameplate right into the middle. And I said, you know what, I don't belong on the end. I'm a key player here, and I put myself right in the middle of the pack. And so you really had to position yourself, and you had to be able to handle some of the language that you might not prefer, and the physicality that you might not prefer. I mean, I remember once being screamed at by a 6-foot something, I mean, like, huge guy at the trading floor, back against a wall. I don't think he was even aware I was there. It wasn't about me. And that's one of the things for women in general, and for people, forget just the gender issue, to understand a lot of times when things are happening within an organization, it's not about you. It's about something going on for them. And for him, it was a bad trade. He lost a lot of money, and I just happened to be there.
So what do you think is about you or within you that has made you so successful in this career journey with all of these different obstacles you faced?
It's a question I've gotten in a lot of different ways at different times. And the way it resonates for me is that success was never a question. It was just a matter of effort. And I've always had that mindset. Somebody asked me once, what was my greatest failure? I'm like, we all kind of make some mistakes and lose some money and don't have a killer program, but I never thought of those as failures. I just thought those as, here's what I got out of that.
So learning opportunities.
Learning opportunities. And when somebody said, what was your plan B? Like,
Plan B?
Well, there was no plan B. It was never a question that I would succeed. It was just a matter of time.
What role have mentors played in your career, if any? And if so, who have been some of those mentors?
I think that there's a lot of different relationships that have played in my career. And I don't know if I would call them official mentors, but yeah, of course they were mentors. And I think that's for people to define. things don't have to be formal to give you the sustenance that you need. I remember one woman, her name is Amy, she's actually in my first book with her real name, she gave me permission, who was a speaker at a conference, and she was doing what I wanted to do. And I went up to her and I started chatting with her. And then I bought her lunch, and she just let me pick her brain for 2 hours, and it was so inspiring. We're still friends. I mean, this is 15 years later, and she lives 15 minutes from my house. And we've had a really amazing relationship through the years where that mentor-mentee relationship has flipped a couple of times back and forth. So that was amazing. And the CEO of the bank that I was just telling you about, he was also a great mentor in the fact that he gave me enough rope to hang myself. He's like, okay, you can do whatever you want to do and I'll support you. And he paid for my education in it.
Wow.
He sent me to the train-the-trainer. He sent me to work one-on-one with Miles Martell, who worked with Reagan and Rumsfeld. I mean, I had all of this elite training that he paid for, as long as I still didn't lose any money on the hedge funds and got all the budgets done, and I did. And
so you had to keep all the balls in the air to pursue this other opportunity.
But that's what motivation's about.
What advice do you give to young people today who want to rise to the top?
I got a lot.
I thought you might.
Where do I start? I will say the number one thing I probably say to all new grads and young professionals is, beyond everything else, attitude over aptitude. We can teach you skills. We can teach you how to functionally do a task. But what we can't teach you is necessarily the work ethic and the smile and the professionalism and the self-awareness and all of those EQ components that is the biggest differentiator between the average performer and the star performer.
Really?
Oh yeah. I have research beyond research that will show you that 58% of your job performance is related to your EQ, not your IQ.
EQ being emotional?
Emotional quotient, emotional intelligence. All of the soft stuff that everyone goes, yeah, that's the stuff that makes a difference.
So grads should really be looking at understanding who they are, what they project, how they work, and this will help propel in their careers.
Getting clear on the impression that people have of them. How are they sitting? How are they showing up? How are they speaking? It is everything from verbal to nonverbal to written communication. It's how you show up in the morning. How do you answer a phone? I mean, think about it. We all have caller ID now.
Yeah.
We know that you're calling. And it floors me when I call and my sister's like, hello.
You know it's me.
Don't you want to talk to your little sister? You know? And so really think about when somebody answers a phone, do they make you feel like you want to talk to them, like you're excited for that call? That makes a difference in the rest of that phone conversation.
What has been your biggest challenge that you've faced in the course of your career, and how did you overcome that?
I think I'm probably facing the biggest challenge in my career right now.
Really?
And that's probably in managing the growth. And there's two pieces to that. One is finding the team to support you in that growth, and the other is finding the balance in that growth. Because when you do something that you are so passionate about, and it's really hard to differentiate between what I do and who I am, and you have a home office, it's very difficult to close the door and to not constantly be thinking about what else I can do and drive that. And I got 2 boys at home saying, hey, let's play cards.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes really hard to still find that balance. So I think it's a constant challenge that we have to consider overcoming, on a daily basis and making those choices in the moment.
Do you think business people are starting to look at what it's like to have a better balance between their work life and their family life or their personal?
I think this is an issue that has been making headway for a couple of decades now, and I think the millennial and Y generations have been pushing it to the front. But there's a lot of back and forth, and I won't go into some of the books out there that counter some of the arguments for the flexible workplace, but I do think that it's not just a woman issue, it's not just a parent issue. The millennial generation, one of the values that they bring to organizations is the desire to live to work, but work to live. I always have trouble with that phrasing, right? They are working not because that's their end all be all, that's everything to them. And that's a flip from previous generations. And it's a challenge, I think, for organizations to understand that mindset and to incorporate and still, get the most out of people and give them what they want.
So you were telling us about your finance career and how you left that career and took big steps to change what you were doing. There's so many people, I feel like, who want to do this, entrepreneurs, people who want to work on independently. What steps did you take?
It is. It's a scary leap, especially when you have the stability and you have the income. And at the time that I did it, I did not have, well, I had a husband, but I was putting him through business school. I also was pregnant with my first child.
Wow.
I think one of the things to think about is, the truth of the matter is, I had been doing it for a while on the side.
Okay.
And for those people who are thinking about doing this, don't wait. It isn't all or nothing. It's beginning to build up the things on the side, getting things in place, whether it's a website, whether it's a client, whether it's incorporation. You can start putting those steps there so it's not, just flip the switch one day. I remember I had my first client before I had a company name. And so I just basically told my company, I said, I'm taking a day off, I'll see you tomorrow. And I went to JP Morgan and trained for a day.
Wow.
I was very open with it about it with my employer. And that's a choice people have to make, whether or not they want to put that out with the employer. But sometimes companies can be very supportive, and your company may end up being your first client if you have a related, business. For me, training, all of my former organizations could be clients. So that's one thing to think about, is to start kind of laying some groundwork on the side. Two other ideas. One, talk about it. Talk. If you're not passionate and excited to tell people what you're doing, what you're thinking about, and what you want to do, then maybe that's not the thing you should be doing. Because if you can't talk about it, people aren't going to know, and they're not going to come up to you, which this is exactly what happened to me, at an animal rescue event that you're chairing and say, hey, Michelle, I hear what you're doing. Would you like to meet my boss? She's the head of IB training at JP Morgan. And I'm like, yes,
sign me up.
yes, please, yes, please. And literally, that's how I got my first client.
Wow.
So talk about it. And the third thing I will do, and this is the really practical step, and this is the base. This is the financial. Understand what you need at a minimum to bring into the household so that you can breathe. And whatever that is, 10,000, 30,000, 50,000, I don't care. That's your base. And you need to think about how to cover your base. So in my industry, in my company, my base was through teaching at NYU as an adjunct professor, coaching faculty at NYU, being on the faculty of the American Management Association, and being on Rutgers Executive Education. So I had pretty guaranteed, pretty known income coming in from 4 sources that would manage my base. And then I could be a little bit more selective or test different types of revenue streams and see what I really liked, what I was best at, where the revenue was coming from. And you can breathe when you know you have a base.
Yeah. You have worked with and trained people across academia, nonprofits, Fortune 500 companies.
Yes.
Very diverse experience that you've had with your training. What makes a great leader?
I absolutely love that question. And actually, the answer to that is the reason that I created a program called the Relationship Driven Leader. And it's a 2-day live immersive experience to take people through all of the components of being a relationship-driven leader, because my answer for you is simply that. The number one thing that will differentiate management and leadership is relatedness. And it's also the number one thing that will lead to people's exit. And I think many of your listeners probably have heard that stat, that the exit interview reason for people leaving has always been the boss. And we're losing $11 billion to turnover. We're losing over $500 billion to disengagement in the US. And if managers can build relationships, understanding their people, understanding what motivates them, being able to then delegate and assign work with explanation that connects to that motivation, connects to those interests, they build loyalty, they build retention. Right now, there was one study that showed 83% of people are looking for new jobs right now. I know, I mean, can you imagine? That's so scary. If you think about 83% of your team leaving right now, you're gonna freak out.
Yeah.
And I know that that statistic has increased because the economy has improved, and for years everybody felt very stuck and afraid. So it is not a normal statistic, but it's been a steadily increasing number.
Okay. You were recently named by Forbes as one of their 25 networking professionals to watch in 2015, which is
pretty exciting.
huge. So tell us about why they chose you and what are some of your networking tips?
I could go on for the whole show about networking tips. It was actually a complete surprise to me that they chose me, so that was really exciting. I had no idea I was even being considered. And the funny thing is I got the email from the guy who wrote the article, and I just didn't really open it. He's like, I included you in this, and I didn't know what it was, and I didn't follow the link for like a week, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I'm number 8! You know?
Fantastic.
You know what? There's so many tips that I can give people on networking. I'm gonna give you 3 because I like to do things in odd numbers. The first is that there is no right way or wrong way to network. Networking is just another way of making friends, and when we take the work out of networking, we're more likely to do it. And so I kind of want to take all the yucky stuff and, you know, we're networking. Yeah. We're talking about hair in the bathroom. That's networking. Networking is just about building relationship, okay? So one, we just have to shift all that other work stuff out of our head. The other 2 things I want to give you are 2 laws from my first book, The 11 Laws of Likability. And the first is the law of authenticity. You cannot connect with another person and build a relationship unless you're bringing the real you. And, you know, being your quirky, authentic self. And that's okay. And we have to accept those, what I call unique charms.
I like it.
Right? This is how I make myself feel better about the fact that I can talk a lot. And understand that authenticity isn't like a green light for being whoever and whatever you want to be. It's about understanding your best qualities and how to temper them when somebody's going, that's a little bit too much, Michelle, and just kind of toning it down. So authenticity is key. It's the foundation of everything that you have to do. And if you cannot be in an interaction or an event with authenticity, I've got lots of ideas in the year of how to shift to find it, or I will just tell you to go home and live to network another day. And the third tip, and this is probably the core of my belief system, is the law of giving. And I actually give this chapter away because I believe so much in the concept. And so I'm sure on the show notes you can put a link to my website and anybody can download the entire chapter for free because I like to say I give away giving. I mean, it's just fun to say that, right?
It is fun.
But when people approach with the desire to add value to somebody else, to give, not to receive, it's not that you won't, but to give because you can, because you want to, because giving creates value, to give first, to give often, and to give without expectation, results happen exponentially for everyone, not just the 2 people in that interaction. Because a lot of times where we give is not from where we receive. We give in the ways that we can, and we receive in the ways that we're allowed. And you need both, but if we have that giving mindset, things come. It's amazing.
So you have a new book coming out in September called Nail the Interview, Land the Job.
Yes.
Why did you write this book and why right now?
The book came out of the second book. So I wrote a book called Heroes Get Hired, which is a resource for veterans and spouses of veterans to help them reintegrate into the civilian workplace. And it was a project for the heart. It is free for the veterans. We had a sponsor. It was an amazing project. And I had all of these people coming up to me saying, what about us? Because I focused only on the veterans and their issues and some of the difficult questions they get, and it was really very catered to them. And I had new grads, and I had people who'd been laid off, and I had the returning parents, a lot of those moms that had been, you know, at home for 10 years, saying, what about me? I got issues. And so I wrote Nail the Interview, Land the Job for those 3 audiences in particular, although it really does apply to anybody going for an interview at any level of their career. But I do highlight some specific challenges that those audiences face and how to overcome them.
What's the one big idea that you would like for all these different readers to take away?
With Nail the Interview, Land the Job, I think what I want everybody to get out of that book is that sense of confidence. Confidence is the most persuasive thing, and you have to believe you before you can convince somebody else to believe you. And so understanding some of the techniques and thinking that you can go through in advance of the interview so that when you get into that one-to-one place, you're in the right mindset to not convince them, but to share with them and to talk to them about what you bring to the table.
How can you go about getting into this frame of mind that you referred to before going into an interview?
I'm going to share with you one of my favorite TED Talks. I've got to meet Amy Cuddy one of these days because I'm always talking about her TED Talk. It is one of my favorite, and it's a 21-minute TED Talk that is completely worth your time. And it talks about body language and power positions. Now, when we think about body language, there's a little bit of nuance in how somebody perceives you. Right now, I'm fine, I'm good, but I'm making myself a little bit small. And I may look a little less secure, and I'm all here, and my shoulders are rounded. When I'm projecting power position, I'm broadening across the chest, my shoulders are back, I'm elevated, my gestures are more broad, and I'm taking up my space, and I come off as more powerful and confident. And so these little nuances are some of the things that you will see and hear in her research. She talks about how if you get into the football stance or the Oprah or the marathon runner and these power positions that expand our body and take up our space, the actual chemicals in the brain are released that increase your confidence. Wow. So your body actually affects the chemical balance in your brain so that you feel it and everybody else receives it too.
Wow.
I actually made my husband before this last job about 2 years ago when he was going for the interview, going to the bathroom beforehand and go for 2 minutes in these power positions.
Yeah.
He got the job.
Fantastic.
Right?
The mind-body connection is just fascinating, and how it can help you in your career.
Personal brand, presence, all of that stuff is huge. If I got in front of an audience and I'm like, okay, we're going to have a great time. I mean, the phones would all come out,
Yeah, yep. Are there some confidence-building exercises that you would recommend to really help you cultivate that sense of confidence that you want to portray?
Actually, I'll give you 2 activities. From the 11 Laws of Likability, there's something called the 3 words exercise. And that's where you start to develop, what are the 3 words I want somebody to say about me? And you want to choose, and it really takes you through 3 steps of kind of looking at your strengths, understanding what people are already saying about you, and then looking where that gap is to try to start to bridge it. Because if you hear that people are like, hey, she's really analytical, you can be like, well, I'm really analytical. And you have no qualms knowing it and believing it. So that's one of the activities. On the Nail the Interview, there's an activity there that I call the CAR exercise, where you want to think about the stories that really display the characteristics that you think are important to that job. So if initiative is a really important character trait in the person who's going to be hired, think about a couple of stories and the circumstances, actions, and results that you have been a part of. And you can share that story with confidence.
In Nail the Interview, you talk about very practical things as well, like what should you bring to your interview? And what about paper resumes? I feel like, with email and with the environment, a lot of people aren't exchanging them anymore.
Well, they certainly don't have to have them on the pretty paper anymore.
No more design.
No, they don't have to have the watermark and the fancy, off-white paper. But I do actually recommend they still do print out at least 3 copies of a resume to have with you, sometimes even 5. And the reason I suggest that is because when an interview goes well, they might say, hey, I want you to meet so-and-so. And if all of a sudden you're catching somebody who wasn't expecting you, who's not seen your resume, they can't then go and print it out. It takes too long. But if you can just put it there and they can glance, you've just made them look good.
Yeah.
And that's what you want to do. You want to show that you're ultra prepared. So I do recommend you still bring the printed resume. I actually have a full checklist of things to think about before and day of the interview in terms of, for women it could be having the spare stockings if you're wearing stockings. Yeah. For the men, did you remove any piercings or things like that? Are the tattoos covered up? It is, tattoos are very common nowadays, and you do want to make sure that your outfit is, hiding anything. So if a lady has something on her ankle, she may want to wear pants or at least dark stockings. So it's little things that we don't think about that could be that moment of, I always say dress one step above the position. So if you are going for a job in a casual working environment, you're not going to wear the 3-piece suit and the tie, but you will wear a sports jacket. So you just step it up a little bit to show that you respect the environment, that you know how to be professional and dress for the role.
What are your secrets to really connecting with the person who's interviewing you?
I love that you said secrets. The truth is we already all do know. It's exactly what you do anytime you meet somebody new that you're curious about. And so you want to leverage the law of curiosity, which is to maybe ask a question. Look at the environment in which you're in. So if you end up in somebody's office and you see pictures, you can ask about, the pictures, awards, whatever it is, the view. I mean, honestly, weather can get you a whole lot of conversation, especially with the crazy weather that we have, right? So it is just being genuine and having that little bit of small talk, but around topics that you care about. I mean, I can get pretty passionate about the weather. I mean, I lived through Sandy and 12 days without power. We could have a conversation.
Yeah.
If it's about football, I'm there. If it's about baseball, I'm not. So I'm not going to talk to you about baseball. And even if you think, oh, we should talk sports, don't force something that's not natural. I remember once going into the COO of Morgan Stanley's office, and this was when I was just starting out, and I wanted this client. There's a huge poster of the Dallas Cowboys in his office. I mean, like, it was bigger than me. It was the entire wall. This is Giants territory. Yeah, we were in New York.
Yeah.
And I look at this poster, I look it up and down, I look at him, and I said, I thought this was going to go well, I'm not so sure.
And how did he take to that?
Exactly like you did. He took it with humor, and we laughed, and we started talking football, and we razzed each other a little bit, and Morgan Stanley was my second client.
Wow. What if you're in an interview and you're asked a question that you don't know how to answer?
There's different types of questions that you don't know how to answer. One is sometimes when you just don't have an example of a story or nothing's coming to mind. And what you can do in those situations is a technique I call extract and redirect. So when you are in a situation where you're asked, and this also goes for inappropriate questions, especially those returning parents might get some of those, or even the new grads could get those inappropriate questions, you're going to extract and redirect. An extraction is saying something related to the question. So if they say something like, well, do you believe that nannies should raise children? Right? Inappropriate question, right? You might say something like, the choice of care for anyone's children is a very personal choice, and I think that there's pros and cons to each of those choices. That's the extraction. So you're not answering the question, but you're talking about something related, and then you're going to redirect. Redirect to something that you want to talk about that's related to the job.
Okay.
What you might say is, I'm very fortunate to have a situation that allows me the flexibility to work and to travel, which is perfect for this blah, 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 right? So you're going to redirect. If it's a skill that you don't have an answer to, it might say, you know what, initiative is a really interesting trait. I think that's very related to blah, 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 and let me talk. And a story comes right to mind with that trait. Can I tell you about that? And they're going to say, sure.
People change jobs a lot today. That is a major change in the business environment, especially with younger generations who find it acceptable, to maybe change jobs every couple of years even. How is this playing in the world of interviews, applying for new jobs? Are most people concerned about it if they look at your resume and see you've changed jobs every 2 or 3 years? And if that's what you've done, how do you position it to the person who's interviewing you as a positive?
You are right on when you say it's very different than it used to be. When, we might have been coming up the ranks, if you were in a job less than 3 years and you were a jumper.
Yeah.
And now, I will tell you, I have said to people, I'm like, you've been there 5 years, you're going to get stale. You're going to get stagnant. It's time to move. Right? And it starts to look bad if you're somewhere too long unless you see some progression within the positions and trajectory in the jobs, changing roles and things like that. So there could be a stigma in either direction. And I think the key when you're telling your story, whether you've been one place a long time or you've jumped around a lot, is to tell the story. What skill, what reason, what opportunity were you going after? And I think sometimes if you have one long stretch, it's fine to have a couple jumps. But if your entire 20-year career is 2 and 3 year jumps, then you have to have a company understand what are you going to bring to the table? Why should they invest in you for that short time if they really know that that's likely going to happen? And that could be okay. They could be like, great, we need this expertise for 2-3 years and then leave.
Yeah, and then get out of here. What are some other tough questions that people should think about in advance and prepare to answer?
You know what I always say to people, and I've done a lot of interview coaching, and one of the questions I ask them to come in with is, what are the 3 questions you're afraid to be asked? Because that's different for everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some standards out there. I mean, everyone's heard the, what is your greatest weakness question? I will never forget the time that I got that question, and I had my panned answer, and it was delegation, and I'd do it all myself, and da-da-da. And the interviewer goes, I get that answer all the time, give me another one. Wow. And this is actually a technique called the rule of 3s. I train on both sides of the table. So I teach interviewers to ask a question in 3 different ways to make sure you're getting at the truth. And I was a deer in the headlights when I was like, I didn't plan another one. You know, I was like, what do you mean I'm not perfect? I tried humor to deflect. I tried to get out of it. I was like, I can't think of one right now. He goes, well, you're going to. Like, he did not let me out of it. And so the interview continued, and at the end of the interview, he goes, okay, so give me another weakness. And, you know, I had been scrambling my brain while still trying to maintain this conversation. And I said to myself, well, if you asked my mom, and I gave a really honest answer. And I said, she might tell you that sometimes I speak before I think, and that my size 6 fits real well in this mouth. And I didn't stop there. I said, she's right. It's a challenge that I've had. My brain sometimes gets ahead of me, and my mouth follows it. And I've been trying really hard to count to 10 and to take a breath and to ask myself some questions before I actually open my mouth. And it's not 100%, but it's definitely better. I got that job.
Wow.
So when we have those standard, what's your greatest weakness, or those type of questions, giving an honest answer. Not the one you think they want to hear, but also showing what are you doing to improve and working on it. Because as we said earlier, attitude over aptitude, I would rather have somebody who understands their challenges and are working on them than someone who thinks they're perfect.
Asking questions during an interview is a good thing.
Absolutely.
What are some questions we should ask, and what are some that we should absolutely not ask?
It does depend on what stage of the interview you're in. I always say, get the job first and then decide if you want it. So you want to make sure that they want you. Once you know they want you, which is usually in the 2nd or the 3rd round, then you are more open to asking some of the questions that are more related to the culture, the environment, the work-life balance, even benefits and salaries and things like that. You don't ask those type of questions earlier on, okay? The questions that you do want to ask earlier on are related to your other decision factors. So one of the things that you are doing when you ask questions is giving them a sense of how you're making your decision about whether or not this job is right for you. I love to ask questions to get the interviewer talking. Why did you choose this company? What do you love about the job? Do you work with coworkers or do you work with friends? What would you want to change about the organization? What's the least favorite part of your day? Like anything to really get insight into how they view the organization, you'll get honest answers. And that also builds rapport. People love to talk about what they feel and think and their opinion. I also love questions around, what advice do you have for somebody coming into this role? Or what do you think are the most important success traits or factors that would lead to somebody hitting this job out of the ballpark? And one of my favorite questions, which is a risk, but this is one of the things I say in the closing of an interview, is to ask if there's anything that you haven't addressed. Do they have any concerns about your ability that you could address? Because if they have them, they have them. And if you don't ask, you can't address it.
Right.
But if you ask, then you got a shot.
You say in the book that you should know first that they want to give you the job before you decide if you want it, really. Why is this so important in the process?
There's many times that I've coached people and they've said that they've tuned out in the middle of the interview. There was something that happened, you know, maybe they were in a stress interview and the guy was being really obnoxious, or he looked at his cell phone or something, and they're like, I don't want to work here. And they then lost the job and the option to change their mind because they then weren't really in it. I must admit I did it once myself, and it was with Goldman Sachs. I was like, I don't want this job, and I can't even pretend and fake it. And I don't want you to pretend and fake it. Don't go on an interview if you don't want the job. But when you are there and you're not sure, come from that place of curiosity, look for the interest and explore, but don't write it off. Because if you've decided you don't want it, well then you've eliminated your chances, because that will project it in the conversation.
And you may change your mind later.
And you might change your mind later.
Keep all those options open.
Exactly.
Michelle, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your expertise.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This has been Sartor TV. I'm Jennifer Crumpton, and we look forward to seeing you next time.